Frank Bruni, for 5 years and change, was the critic of record in the paper that matters in the city that we care most about. He's since been able to relax, loosen up his tie, and enjoy the life of book touring and a regular writer. So he'll be writing pieces for the Times about food and not about food, whatever he wants to. So he's there. He's going to have fun. Please welcome Frank Bruni. Do you keep track of calories? I mean, are you in the 2,500 to 3,000 zone? Because I mean, I'm out to dinner all the time in New York, and it's tough because, especially as a critic, you're obliged to eat. I mean, you're not there to nibble and order the salad and the Dover sole Gruyere with the steamed spinach. You're supposed to eat food, and a lot of food, and taste everybody else's food, and swallow. Right. Well, calories.
That almost sounded dirty. Yeah, no, I don't count calories. And I mean, one thing I should say about eating out as a critic is you are eating, I think, a bigger dinner than most other people eat. But although you're trying 12 things, you're not having 12. You're not having 4 appetizers, 4 entrees. I mean, you're if everything works out perfectly, you're having a quarter of each appetizer, and your other 3 companions are having, the other 3/4 of it between them. I think those of us who love restaurants and love food should be grateful that even in an era when, when newspapers are in big trouble and turning a profit's really hard, I never had them reduce my dining out budget. I know they haven't reduced it for my successor, Sam Sifton. It's one of the most expensive beats to maintain, but they believe that food lovers and New Yorkers, want to know when they read those reviews, as opposed to when they read something on Yelp, that whether they agree with a critic or not, they're reading a considered opinion based on at least 3 restaurant visits, based on a thorough canvassing of the menu, and based on money spent by the paper. I mean, a lot of the stuff you see online, a lot of it's lively, a lot of it's great, some of it has a lot of integrity, but some of it you have no idea. You're reading it because that's a restaurant in which the person writing it dines for free frequently, and thus that restaurant's getting mentioned more often. At least when you read the Times, that there's utter economic independence of the critic. When Jeffrey Chodorow took out that full-page ad against me in the Times,
you guys remember that? You guys remember? The setup piece was Frank had written a not terribly flattering review of one of Jeffrey's restaurants, which I don't know how you can write many flattering reviews of any of his restaurants, but he's a very successful businmasman.
So you might have to look long and hard in the archives to find a flattering review of a Jeffrey Chodorow restaurant.
Yes, you will, and I'm not sure where you will. So it was the following week.
I think there was actually like a 3-week lag. I remember it caught me by surprise when it happened because some time had passed.
So a couple of weeks later, you tell the story. It's a classic story of hubris in New York and money and egos.
I think, and I have no qualm with what he did. I think that he felt slighted by me over time because I had either reviewed or written about him a number of times and in a slightly personal way. I mean, I called him a gimmick maestro, and I talked about his body of restaurants in a very derisive way, which I think was warranted by the restaurants. But and my tone was a little bit snide because that was my tone. And
this was the Kobe Club that you had reviewed, the one that he freaked out about, where you were seated beneath the business end of dangling samurai swords.
Well, that's the restaurant closed now, where there were more than 1,000 swords pointed downward, dangling from the ceiling. Yeah. Well,
it's a touch.
I think gimmick maestro's not.
No.
So one day he just kind of bought ad space in the Times opposite the column, to write a kind of open letter. I mention it only because one of the things he said in the letter, which I thought was so funny, and we let it go in, we didn't correct it, but he said, we wouldn't be content if your architecture critic wasn't an architect. Well, guess what? Our architecture critic isn't an architect. It's funny that people have this especially protective and sensitive attitude about food. Anonymity is impossible in certain restaurants at certain moments. If you're opening a restaurant that you hope will get 2, 3, or 4 stars in this day and age, and you're in your first 3 months of service, you care as much about catching critics, and especially the Times critic, on his or her way in the door as you care about anything else. And I've heard stories of sentries posted at street corners every night. I definitely know there's, like at many restaurants for the first couple months, there's an employee whose sole job is to stand just inside the entrance and study faces to try to catch the critics, and especially the Times critic. In a situation like that, no wig, nothing is going to change it. So to kind of wring one's hands about that is just an exercise in futility. It's not going to change. I think that what critics do have within their control, and what I think is very important, is to prevent a restaurant from knowing you're coming. Because now we're going to get to your question of how much does it matter.
Right, thank you.
You walk in the door, they see you. They will absolutely, in certain kinds of restaurants, make sure that your wait person is dealing with no other table, and you can see it, you know. They may very well do what they did at Del Posto, for example, I knew through the grapevine, which is they will make 2 of every appetizer, entree, and dessert your table orders, so that as those dishes come off the line, the chef can say, okay, I think that one looks like it came out better, and they'll just, you know, I don't know what happens to the other one. You know, there's maybe some really happy dogs in the neighborhood.
Family meal, whatever.
They can do that, but they can't change the menu.
Right.
They can't make a new run to the green market. They can't change their meat supplier. They can't change their kitchen staff and get a more talented staff. They can't rejigger their recipes at the last minute. I mean, you will still get, it'll be a stilted, but it will be a fundamentally honest experience of the restaurant.
I mentioned that on Platinum, you were talking about being anonymous a couple of months ago. I don't know why people, if you're in the business that you're in, I don't know why people would tweet while they're at restaurants. It seems a little bit of a...
Yeah.
So Adam's at a restaurant that a friend of mine happens to be the owner of. It's a great restaurant. It's a new restaurant. It was on everybody's radar. And he's tweeting while he's at the restaurant. And of course, Adam's got a lot of friends that are all mutual friends. And one of the things he tweets about was he's just sitting down. He's complaining about the size of his chair. He's uncomfortable. And he tweets it, and it's instantaneous. And a mutual friend of ours, who also knows the restaurant owner, gets the tweet, tweets the restaurant owner. Platt's there, and he doesn't like his chair. And within 2 minutes, the owner came up and said, hey, carries a chair over and said, I got another chair for you. I mean, yeah.
This was Maria, wasn't it?
Yeah, he knows the guys.
You know, I don't know. I mean, I can't, that's impossible to say, but I mean, I can tell you some of the places I've been spending my own money over the last couple months. I'm a big fan of the restaurant Peasant in
Frankie DiCarlo, Elizabeth Street between Spring and Prince. He's good.
And I feel remiss that I never actually wrote it was reviewed by Biff Grimes on his watch. He gave it 1 star. I don't want to say what I think it deserves because I have a successor who now does that, and I don't. But I mean, my enthusiasm for Peasant is greater than the enthusiasm that was conveyed by Biff when he wrote about it, and for complicated reasons that really I just never did get around to reviewing it, and I regret that. So I've been there a couple times on my own dime. I've been to Vinegar Hill House in Brooklyn a couple times on my own dime because it's convenient to an apartment that I spend a lot of time in, and I think it's a kind of nice experience for the money. Now I'm drawing a blank. I've been to Veloce Pizzeria a number of times on my own dime. I think it's a very pleasant place, and it's kind of their grandma's or Sicilian-style pie is a nice kind of change of pace from all the Neapolitan individual size, you know, una pizza, Napolitana type pies.
What are some of Frank Bruni's most memorable desserts that he had, and some of his favorite bakeries?
First of all, desserts. There's I think the pastry. I think he's still there, but it changes a lot. So the pastry chef at Adore by Alain Ducasse. I think his name is Sandro Micheli, and Micheli. I may be mispronouncing it. At least when that restaurant opened, his first dessert list or his first dessert menu was terrific, and there was something on it called the Contemporary Exotic Vacherin, which I think is one of the best desserts I had on my watch. There's a dessert at Corton that has, I think, it's completely misnamed, and now I'm drawing a blank about it, but I know it has a coffee element, it has a blue cheese element. It basically tastes like a desertified piece of French toast with blue cheese. And it's fantastic, and I think it's still on the menu there.
It was the last time I was there. Great pastry chef there too.
Yeah, you know, bakeries. I tend not to kind of scout wide and far to go to the bakery. I mean, I tend to kind of use what's near. And there's a bakery in my neighborhood that I love called Lavam Bakery on 74th, just off Amsterdam. It's a very limited, they do a very limited thing, but some of the things they do really, really well.
They're famous for that big chocolate chip.
Yeah, they have a cookie that you're either gonna love or hate. It's a real interesting lightning rod. I mean, it's a real interesting, like, kind of acid test cookie because it's enormous, and so the center of it never gets all the way baked. So it's sort of like a cookie surrounding a little bit of cookie dough, and people either love it or think it's an abortion.
Yeah. And I would say Bouchon Bakery, the Time Warner. Sebastian,
Oh, that's a great, yeah.
That's great. Third floor, it's casual. Sebastian Roussel oversees all of Thomas Keller's baking at all of his restaurants. Started out, I met him back when he was at the French Laundry. He's remarkably talented. Paillard sadly closed. I know you all know that. That was probably the greatest pastry shop in the city, if not the country. And I don't know if you've ever been to Petrosian. They have a wonderful little bake shop. It's on 7th Avenue between 57th and 58th. You can walk right past it and miss it. But I'd argue that, sadly, Paillard's gone, but with Bouchon, that's probably the two of my favorites. The best croissant, best pain chocolat, best basics, best standards, and they do a wonderful job. From this side of the room,
one other thing, are you familiar with Karen Damasco?
Oh, great.
Anywhere she's doing desserts you want to check out. She is affiliated, for the most part, with the Kraft Empire, but she did the desserts at Locanda Verde, the Andrew Carmelini restaurant in Tribeca, and some of them are really fantastic. There are a couple of house-made gelato flavors that she does there that in a city gone mad with gelato flavors are still revelations.
She's brilliant. And Kate Zuckerman, sadly, I think Chanterelle's not going to open now, but Kate Zuckerman, who was at Chanterelle's, another great pastry chef. So wherever she hangs her hat next, keep an eye on her. On that note, folks, thanks everybody for coming out. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank Bruni.
Thank you.
And again, afterwards, we'll meet you outside. There'll be a little book signing. Thank you all for coming out tonight.